All right, think about this for a second. Picture a mushroom. You've seen them a million times, right? In the forest, maybe even in your salad. It seems so simple. But what if I told you that simple little mushroom has been at the center of a massive biological identity crisis that lasted for centuries?
I mean, when you see one pushing up through the dirt, it's not moving, it's rooted in the ground, your first thought is, it's a plant. That's just instinct, right?
And you know what? For the longest time, science completely agreed with you. For centuries, going all the way back to the 1700s, fungi were officially lumped right in there with flowers, trees, and mosses. They were just considered a weird, primitive kind of plant.
Yeah, about that. Science was wrong. Dead wrong, actually. Fungi are not plants. Not even close. And the story of how we figured that out is a detective story that uncovers a world that's way stranger, way more complex, and a lot closer to us than you might think.
So, first question. How did we get it so wrong for so long? Well, it was a classic case of mistaken identity, based pretty much entirely on the fact that they just sit there.
Look at this timeline. For over 200 years, this was just settled science. It wasn't until 1955 that scientists really started to ask the question out loud. And get this, it took until 1969 for fungi to finally get their own separate kingdom. We literally put a man on the moon the same year we figured out a mushroom isn't a vegetable. That's how recent all this is.
So what was the evidence that finally blew the case wide open? It all came down to a few key differences that once you see them, you just can't unsee.
Okay, this chart right here. This is the whole story in a nutshell. First, how they eat. Plants are autotrophs. They're like little solar-powered factories, making their own food. Fungi? Nope. They're heterotrophs. They have to eat other things, just like you and me. Second, their structure. Plant cells are built from cellulose, think wood fiber. Fungal cells are built from something totally different, called chitin. And third, energy. Plants store it as starch, like in a potato. Fungi store it as glycogen, which, by the way, is exactly how animals store energy in their muscles and liver. See where this is going?
And that whole eating thing is a huge deal. Fungi are nature's ultimate recyclers. They don't have mouths. Instead, they ooze out these powerful digestive enzymes into, say, a dead log. The enzymes break everything down, and then the fungus just absorbs all the nutrients. It's basically an external stomach. That is nothing like how a plant works.
And this cell wall difference? This is where it gets really weird. Cellulose makes trees strong. Chitin is the tough, flexible stuff that makes up the shells of insects, spiders, and crabs. So on a molecular level, a mushroom has more in common with a beetle than it does with a daisy.
Okay, so we've established they're not plants. Case closed, right? Not even close. Because if they're not plants, then who is their closest relative? Get ready, because the answer completely blindsided the scientific world.
I'm just going to let that quote hang there for a second. Read it again. The genetic, molecular, all the data we have evidence points to one absolutely stunning conclusion. Fungi are more closely related to animals, to us, than they are to plants.
This just changes the whole picture. That mushroom isn't some weird alien thing. On the giant family tree of life, it's one of our distant cousins. We're on a much closer branch to them than they are to any flower or tree.
So how is that even possible? Well, it turns out we both evolved from the same ancient ancestor. We belong to this biological supergroup called Opisthokonta, which literally means rear tail. Why? Because our last common ancestor, billions of years ago, was a tiny single-celled creature that propelled itself with a single tail, or flagellum, at its back. And you can still see the blueprint of that ancient ancestor today in the spores of some fungi and, amazingly, in animal sperm cells.
So they're unique, and they're our relatives. But how in the world did they become so successful, showing up in every ecosystem on Earth? Well, they are absolute geniuses when it comes to reproduction.
Their sexual reproduction is this really cool, patient, three-step dance. Unlike with animals, where everything merges at once, fungi take their time. First, the bodies of two parent cells fuse together, but their DNA stays separate inside. Then, later, in a step that literally translates to nuclear marriage, the two nuclei finally combine. This new hybrid cell then divides up to create spores with brand new genetic combinations, ready to go out and conquer the world.
But let's be honest, that process can be a little slow. When times are good and there's plenty of food, fungi often switch to a much faster strategy. Just make clones. They can just break off a piece or bud like a yeast cell, or just produce massive clouds of genetically identical spores.
And when they need to spread, they play a numbers game that is almost impossible to comprehend. We are not talking thousands or millions or even billions. We are talking trillions.
Just try to wrap your head around this. A single giant puffball mushroom can release a puff of smoke containing trillions of microscopic spores. It's a strategy of overwhelming force, ensuring that at least a few of those trillions will land somewhere they can grow.
So when you put it all together, their unique way of life, their shocking family tree, this incredible reproductive power, you start to realize that this isn't just some weird little kingdom. It is absolutely essential to how our entire planet functions.
Just how big is this kingdom? To give you some perspective, there are maybe 6,000 species of mammals on Earth. The best estimates for fungi? Somewhere between 2.2 and 3.8 million species. The diversity is just staggering.
And why should you care? Because without them, life as we know it would grind to a halt. They're the planet's cleanup crew, the only things that can break down wood and recycle those nutrients back into the ecosystem. Over 90% of all plants on Earth literally cannot survive without fungal partners in their roots. And now, we're even using them to clean up our own toxic messes like oil spills.
But here it is, the single most mind-blowing fact of all. Of those up to 3.8 million species, we've only actually identified and named about 148,000 of them. That means over 90% of the entire fungi kingdom is still a complete and total mystery to us.
Which just leaves you with this incredible question, doesn't it? We've solved their identity crisis, we know who they are, and we know they're our relatives. But with the vast majority of their world still completely unexplored, what other secrets, what new medicines, new materials, what new truths about life itself are they just sitting there waiting for us to find?